back to my Mental Health and Crime channel. My name is Huda London. This is the case of the Idaho quadruple murders. On the 13th of November, when police was notified about the horrific murders that took place in Kings Road, we saw that many of the students in Idaho, Moscow, left home early for Thanksgiving. I always wonder if that could have hindered the case, or if that could have actually tampered even the investigation. Because usually when a crime happens, everyone is supposed to be in the campus, just in case police need to interview them or re-interview them about the 4 victims they knew or they were friends with. Could this have tampered with the investigation? And many people were ruled out too quickly. I know that law enforcement have the ways of dealing with the investigation and finding out who to rule out after they take interviews with them. But many people were ruled out too early, I believe. And I hope that the option is open for the investigators to re-interview them.
Holiday weekend, as police seem to have few leads in the murders of 4 students at their home off campus. I'm Anjanette Levy, and welcome to Law and Crime Sidebar Podcast. We are taking a closer look at what we know so far in the murders of those 4 students a little more than 2 weeks ago. Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle had been out for the night and were killed sometime after they returned home in the early morning hours of November 13th. Maddie and Kaylee were captured on a Twitch stream video at the Grub Truck. That was a food truck. Shortly before they went home for the night. They had been at the Corner Club bar before that. Ethan and Xana were dating and had been at a party at the Sigma Chi house earlier in the evening. Here's Captain Roger Lanier of the Moscow Police Department discussing the timeline so far.
On the evening of November 12th and into the early morning hours of November 13th, Kaylee and Madison arrived home at approximately 1:45 a.m. after visiting a local bar and a street food vendor. Ethan and Xana were also out in the community at Sigma Chi, and they arrived home at approximately 1:45 a.m. 2 surviving roommates who were also out in the community arrived home at approximately 1 a.m.
Now, later that morning, it was 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was placed from one of the surviving roommates' cell phones. They had actually called a friend to the house because they believed one of the people who was actually killed was sleeping and unconscious. Police say the 911 call takers had actually spoken to more than one person who was at the home at the time. Autopsies revealed that the victims were all stabbed, and some of them had defensive wounds. Others were stabbed as they were sleeping. Police have said there were no signs of sexual assault. So far, police say they've been able to rule out some people related to the investigation. Joining me to discuss the very latest on this case is forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan, who's been following this case very closely since the beginning. Joseph, welcome back to Sidebar. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Anjanette.
You know, the timing of this is really interesting and kind of peculiar. This happened, a week or so, week and a half before the long holiday weekend. So is there any way that could have impacted the investigation, the fact that kids may have been getting ready to go home for the holiday?
Yeah. In my estimation, yes, of course it could. As a college professor myself and living, and working in a university environment, it's kind of amazing when you have these events that kind of shake the university to its core, and it extends out. And with an event like this, you've already, let's just think about what the kids are thinking about at this moment in time. Prior to this event, they've had a long semester. They're coming to the end of it. They see the finish line. Thanksgiving is on its way, and all of a sudden, bam, this horrible event occurs. They were already thinking about leaving anyway. The floodgate was kind of open, when news, kind of leached out about this, and people were probably stumbling over themselves to get to their cars, to leave, to flee to safety, to get home. And from an investigative standpoint, this is a perfect storm. You begin to see things in a different light. You think, well, is it worth me hanging around for another day, another night, when I know that people that might not be in my immediate circle, but are at least peripheral to me, have had this event that has rocked us to our core, think I'm leaving. Well, when that happens, the investigators lose a big chunk of potential interviewees. They've left. And here's the thing about doing an investigation. Sometimes for the investigators, they can stimulate something in the brain of an interviewee that the interviewee might not have thought about. And all of a sudden information comes out. It comes flowing back to the police. And think about how large this university is. If I've heard estimates of, 10 to 11,000 people inhabit this small space. It's amazing how many of these individuals may very well have data contained in their brain or in their remembrances that they might, just dismiss and say, well, that wasn't important. But then you contextualize it when you're sitting across the table from an investigator, and suddenly something clicks and you have important data flowing in. Now we're 2 weeks downrange at this moment in time. Think about this. 2 weeks downrange, memories begin to fade after this period of time. Recall is not immediate. So not only do you have a scene that is highly complex from a forensic standpoint, from when you're trying to gather biological evidence, now on the other side, you've got this kind of lack of communication or interaction with individuals that might have knowledge about the case.
So I would assume, as an investigator, you would want to kind of put that plea out again. If you have kids who are returning back to school, you put that plea out again, or you're going through, the cell phone dumps of these victims, which can be very tedious and time consuming. And you're probably looking to, say, hey, we need to talk to you. Anybody who knew these people, who knew any of the victims, who might have some information. So I'm assuming we'll hear another plea for people to come forward.
Yeah, you will. And the other thing that you have to kind of entertain with this, and you don't know if their remembrances have now been kind of polluted by virtue of the fact of everything they've heard in the news. Because trust me, when they're at home, they've been watching this, and they're back at mom and dad's house. They've been watching this. This is where they go to school. This is where they live their lives. And so all of that data is coming in, and it can perhaps impact those remembrances that we just talked about. And it kind of creates a headache for the investigators, and it diminishes the potential for clarity. If you had gotten to people like within, that 24 to 48 hour window, that could have worked. And this increases exponentially. We've got 4 victims, so each one of these victims have individual lives where they're going to class, they're going out to eat, maybe they've got jobs, and they're interacting with all of these different people that populate this area. So, from a mathematical standpoint, when you begin to think about this, it becomes highly complex, and that again is a problem.
I've been looking at some of the stats that the Moscow Police Department has released. So far, more than 260 pieces of digital evidence, whether that's photographs or video, have been uploaded to the FBI's link. 113 pieces of physical evidence have been submitted to the Idaho State Police Crime Lab for processing. We know those things can take some time, even though they may be putting a rush on it. So We're a little more than 2 weeks in. What should investigators know by now?
Well, I think that what they know, and this is, kind of obvious, on my part, when you begin to think about this, they know that they have something that they're dealing with that is very complex, particularly when you begin to think about the biological evidence I've already mentioned. I always return back um, to the idea of commingling of this evidence. And I'm talking specifically about blood evidence. And also, that's layered on top of that, Anjanette, is the problem. If we are to believe what we have heard, this location was a hangout spot for a lot of kids that come and go. And there's no negative connotation. People do that in college. I did that in college. Everybody I know did that in college. It was a place that you went to, friends, off campus. Well, for every person that entered into that residence, there's potential that they left some remnant of themselves behind. And right now I'm talking about touch DNA. Not only that, I'm thinking about the shedding of hair, because you lose hair in this environment as well. And the trouble that presents for the forensic scientist is they have to wade through all of that potential data and examine it bit by bit to try and understand who this is connected to. Also, you begin to kind of whittle this down. Your five, well, let me get my arithmetic right. Your six knowns that inhabit that space day in and day out. You've got five roommates and you've got a boyfriend. Well, you also have to think about, did anybody else in that environment have a romantic partner that might be visiting that location on a more than regular basis? They're kind of in and out. They might have access to the property. So that's another person that would be connected to this. Then you think about, well, did parents help anybody move in or move out? Have parents been there? So you think about their DNA. And then you've got the hangout crowd, all of those people that kind of migrate through this location in and out. What are they dragging in with them? So it is a daunting undertaking for people that work in trace evidence, and specifically for those that work in DNA.
And police have been battling a lot of things having to do with this case, including the spread of rumors. And they addressed one of these when they discussed the 911 call that was placed from the home on November 13th. So let's listen as Captain Lanier discusses the 911 call in this case.
We have not released the names of any of the subjects who spoke on the 911 call, and we have not released the call itself. Any online reports of the victims being tied and gagged are not accurate.
Joseph, you heard Captain Lanier saying that the victims in this case were not tied or gagged or anything like that. So obviously there are a lot of rumors spreading about this case, and they're trying to dispel those rumors. But the 911 call itself, do you find it unusual that that has not been released? A lot of times in cases we hear these 911 calls, they're released pretty quickly, but they're not talking about who was on the call, who placed the call, and they're not letting us hear it. So why is that?
Yeah, I think that it's a major piece of evidence, or at least the police view it that way, and they want to try to keep this as locked down as they possibly can. I take issue, I think, with people that say that the police are lagging, or they're not on top of things as they should be. I think just the opposite. I think they're really on top of this, and that they're trying to keep in check all of the evidence that they have, whether it be, the blood evidence. And I've heard all these wild things about people, perpetrator possibly taking a shower at the residence and changing clothes with them. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but a lot of the stuff is wild speculation because people want information for whatever reason. And I don't necessarily think that it's the people that occupied Moscow, Idaho. I think more than anybody, they want these crimes solved. People just have a thirst for information. And so things can kick off very, very easily, and rumors can start. I have no understanding where the idea of binding came up.
It seems like it would be unusual with 4 victims, right?
Yeah, it would be. How are you going to maintain that? And then, you open the door up. Well, I've heard people say that there was more than one perpetrator. I even heard one wild rumor that said there were 3 that went in. And, I don't see how people are coming to these conclusions at this point. And at this point, it's total and complete speculation until the police confirm it. And they're not going to release any of this information. Information is the coin of the realm, if you will. The data here is the coin of the realm. And they have to protect it very carefully. Because if they don't know who the perpetrator is, okay, at this point, anything that they can release, if they capture somebody in this case, any information that's disseminated to the general public is disseminated to the perpetrator, and they can adjust their statement, when they are finally brought in for questioning.
It's
88 unusual circumstances calls and 36 welfare checks requests between November 13th, the day of the attack, and yesterday. For context, this is up from all the calls and checks for the entire month of October, quite significantly. Police also sounding the alarm on a trend in which the callers are notifying their friends or family before phoning officers to respond. The Moscow Police Department put out a statement saying in part, quote, "We understand there's a sense of fear within our community. For life safety and emergencies, we want to remind our community to call 911 before notifying family or friends." And now 2 local locksmiths saying they've been getting 50 calls per day of people wanting new deadbolts installed in their homes.
It's just an eerie feeling. Moscow just doesn't feel the same right now.
Just feel better till they have somebody apprehended.
Moscow had not recorded a murder in 7 years until these 4 students, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xana Kernodle, who have all lived at the off-campus house, and the 4th student, Ethan Chapin, who was there visiting his girlfriend, were brutally murdered.
Timeline very early on for Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle, and it showed them at a frat party from 8 to 9 p.m., but then nothing until 1:45 a.m. when they returned home. So if you do the math, that is a gaping 4-hour and 45-minute hole in the timeline for where these 2 were. Last week, we pointed that out on this show. And then this week, more than 3 weeks after the murders, the police began asking the public for information about that gap in the timeline, saying, help us determine where this couple was in that 4 hours, 45 minutes. Do you have video? Did you see them? Do you have audio? Can you help us place this timeline? And then curiously, this happened today. The Idaho Statesman newspaper, again, they reported the following. Kernodle and Chapin were at a party at the Sigma Chi house for the full duration. From about 9 p.m. to 1:45 a.m., police have established. Police have established? No, they haven't. At least they sure aren't telling us what they might be telling the Idaho Statesman. They just asked us for help figuring out where they were for that 4 hours and 45 minutes. This just seems totally bizarre to us. Given that they haven't released anything official regarding this timeline, right? So what did we do? Of course, we went back to the police. And we asked the police if something had changed. Were they no longer in need of our assistance in helping to determine where Ethan and Xana were? Did the Statesman get something important that the rest of the media wasn't told? So now there's 2 messages out there? Okay, so here's what we got. We got an email, and we got it late today from what's being called the Moscow Communications Team. I hadn't heard that before, but that's new. And this is the quote that they gave us. Moving forward, we will not be doing reviews of the case process or answering any questions about previously released information. That's not helpful. And then, in their latest public recap that was issued today, something different. Police said the couple was, quote, believed to be at the frat party all night, but still wanted more information about, quote, interactions and contacts and direction and method of travel. Are you confused? Because I am.
So the question still remains, where was the couple? Were they at the Sigma Chi party from 9:45 to 1:45 a.m.? And if they were, why is the police still asking the public for help? Then we had the Thanksgiving break. Right after the murders, many students went home. How do we know that somebody who could have important information went home and maybe never came back? That is a possibility. We heard that there was a fight at the Sigma Chi. Did something happen at the Sigma Chi fraternity that led to the quadruple murders? Why isn't Ethan and Xana's timeline clear? Why is there so much changes in the timeline? Were they the targets?
This is a hard one. FBI profiler, host of Inside the Criminal Mind, podcaster Andrew Bringle. It's good to have you. Thank you for doing this, sir.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Surprising that they have kids back on campus when they're talking about a targeting crime?
Not surprising. I think that the police are doing everything they can to identify the suspect. The campus has to go on. Life has to go on. So I think the police are covering this case as best as they can with the help of the state police and the FBI.
By percentage, it is much more likely that this was committed by somebody, especially being the means here, stabbing, by someone who knew these people than by a stranger. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think based on the open source information, it appears that the suspect, the killer, is likely someone who knew the victim or victims, knew the layout of the house, knew how to get entry into the house. There was no indication of a forced entry, no indication of rape or an economic incentive, a motive of robbery. He had to be somewhat confident that he could overcome any obstacle in his way. He had a knife. He must have known that these individuals were sleeping. He attacked both the second and third floor, left the first floor with no victims. So it appears, based on the open source information, that he felt confident that he could go into that house and kill the people that he was targeting and then escape without being caught.
Doing it silently, and how do you know it's a he?
Well, the assumption is that it was a male that was targeting one of the females or multiple females in the home. Again, the use of the weapon, the choice of weapon, the type of crime that was committed is typical of a male. And I would guess that this is probably a young male, someone on campus, maybe still on campus, hiding in plain sight.
So then you have the continuing concern about, was this a one and done, or is this somebody who has a taste for this? Is there anything that you see here that suggests an answer either way?
Well, I think the FBI assisting through VICAP and looking at other cases in and around the area. I think there was a reported case in Oregon about 400 miles away of a couple being killed in their sleep. Those connections will be looked at, but it doesn't appear, at least from the evidence that's been released, that this is a serial killer. It's definitely a disorganized crime scene, and you sometimes see that with serial killers. But in this particular case, there's no signature that's been released by the police. Some of that may be intentional in case they do have a list of suspects that they're looking at, and I would understand that. But at the same time, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, the police are working this case from various different angles, and I feel confident that they'll make good progress in this case, both for the safety of the community and certainly justice for the victims and their families.
I do agree with the former FBI agent. It could be someone in the university itself, one of the students, someone local who's hiding in plain sight. Up to today, I always said it has to be someone who knows the layers of the house, because the house is kind of confusing. It has a lot of steps. It's someone who definitely has the code to enter the house, or if not, knows that the sliding door is always open, unlocked. It could be one of the ex-boyfriends, allegedly, who could have been jealous that their girlfriend was moving away. It could be one of the fraternity boys who were upset or envious of Ethan and Xana's relationship. Or maybe it could be something totally different. I just find it hard to believe that one person could have committed such a horrific quadruple murders in such a short time.
Developments in that unsolved murder case of 4 University of Idaho students. It now appears a previously unknown person was on the lease for that off-campus home where the murders happened nearly 3 weeks ago. Police say that person was not at the home on the night of the murders. It has been nearly 3 weeks this weekend since Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Kaylee Gonsalves were killed, and police still do not have a suspect in custody. Former FBI Special Agent Stuart Kaplan joining us once again. He's been with us since the start of this case, breaking down the evidence, the details, and what we know based on what police have released publicly. Thanks for being back again this morning. I think let's start with what we've learned overnight and this possible 6th person on the lease. How critical is that in terms of evidence, police questioning?
Well, it's a little confusing because you would think that by interviewing the surviving roommates that they would have identified that there was some other person who also resided or who at least was legally responsible with respect to being on a lease. So that's somewhat confusing, and I think it's going towards some of the erosion of confidence that this police department, this local police department, is now getting the backlash from. But let me just interject for you this morning that I think will be very pivotal and very telling. These unfortunate murders took place on November 13th. Generally speaking, toxicology reports with respect to the victims generally should come back within 4 to 6 weeks. And so we're close, we're coming upon that 4th week. And I think that the toxicology reports in connection with these 4 victims will be very telling with respect to, I have no doubt, or I will make an assumption that there will be evidence of alcohol in their system. But if in fact there is other substances that are identified and detected in these or any of these victims, I think that may start to zero in on some other potential targets in this investigation.
I hear what you're saying. It's important and prudent probably to be patient. And I always give police the benefit of the doubt as they work through a very complicated investigation. But there is a lot of criticism. Local police are taking the charge on this. The FBI is involved. Is this messy police work? Because the heat's on. There's a lot of media there. The community wants answers. They're scared.
So let me be frank. I think it's a lack of experience. Look, this small town in Idaho has never, ever, unfortunately, had to endure what they're enduring right now. And to no fault of the local police department, when that 911 call originally went out, they believed in good faith that someone within the house was unconscious. They may have anticipated that it was more of a medical emergency than a crime, or ultimately ending up with an unfortunate, horrible, barbaric crime scene. And so I think that some of what we are suffering from, or some of what is being played out, is just the inexperience of this local police department who originally came upon this awful scene. And most or all experienced detectives, FBI agents, anybody who's been in this business for a long time will tell you that the initial onset of coming onto a scene like this must be, the integrity of this crime scene must be maintained at all costs. Now, with that being said, I cannot fault the local police department with respect to running into this house because they in good faith believed that it was a medical emergency. But let me suggest that once they realized what they had, and they should have immediately backed out of that house. And then I think it would have been more prudent to maybe call the state agencies or the federal agencies to assist them. And I don't think that happened in a timely fashion. And that is unfortunately leading to some of the missteps in this case.
The coroner has said that a toxicological report isn't necessary. I do hope they take one, because it's important to know if the students were overdosed, if they were poisoned, if anything happened before the quadruple murders. It doesn't make sense. Every murder case usually has a toxicological report to rule out potential things that could have happened.
They're thinking gang, maybe they're thinking cartel because of the ruthless nature of it. Is it typical that you would have these hits where innocent victims are, I don't want to say the target because it almost makes me want to say maybe they were a target. Maybe it's a calling card. Obviously there was somebody in that house, or maybe there's someone in the house that was the primary target, but you kill innocent victims to send a message. Am I off with that?
No, absolutely not. I mean, the cartels right now are operating like a global terror organization like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Hezbollah, and they are trying to intimidate people. And it's really taking it to a new level when you're executing a 16-year-old mother and a 10-month-old baby. But that's exactly what they're trying to accomplish. They're